Hi, this is Ari Kopel and Serena with Shattering the Matrix. We have a fantastic guest today. James Bartley is with us, and James has investigated alien abductions with an emphasis on reptilian abductions and military abductions known as MILABs for over 20 years. He is a protege of one of the great pioneers of alien abduction research, the late Barbara Bartley, who had coined the phrase the Reptilian Overlordship. James has conducted field investigations in many of the UFO hotspots in California, Nevada, and Arizona, and has worked with many abductees in MILABs. James formerly worked in an intelligence-related capacity for U.S. Naval Air Forces known as NAVAIR. He is an independent historian with an emphasis of intelligence, counterintelligence, and special operations. He is a student of military history from antiquity to modern times, and has made an in-depth study of the military-industrial financial security complex, which developed after World War II. James also was featured as a speaker at one of the Roswell conferences in Roswell, New Mexico in early July 2007, commemorating the 60th anniversary of the famous Roswell crash retrievals. James has also lectured in San Diego, California, Las Vegas, Nevada, Memphis, Tennessee, and in Mississippi. James hosted his own radio and internet webcast program based on Tucson, Arizona, at least out of Tucson, Arizona, in the late 1990s and into the new millennium. He has appeared as a featured guest on public access cable television programs in California and Arizona. His research has been translated into a number of languages, including but not limited to Italian, German, Spanish, and Croatian. James, welcome to our show.
Hello, Ari. Hello, Serena. It's great being here.
Well,
Thank you so much.
It's an honor to have you. And, we have this ugly topic that we don't like to talk about, that we have to address today with the audience.
Yes, but I believe that bringing to light this kind of information is ultimately empowering. It will actually encourage people to do their own research and help them to reintegrate and heal if they've gone through some of these experiences, provides them validation. So I'm really looking forward to this interview.
Awesome, thank you, and so are we. So we would like to start with addressing, what are MILABs? Why do we need to address this? Why is this so important for people to understand? Because, like I said, I just mentioned, and and we all know, this is stuff that is really... It's not feel good. It's not, the type of thing that most of the spiritual community is accustomed to, right? But this is part of being what I call a light worker, because in my opinion, and we've also interviewed a wonderful guest known as Dr. Lynn Strauss, who also said that we can't have the word light worker without knowing that there's the word work in there. We've got to do our work. We've got to do our research. We've got to do our homework. And knowing about the planet and the world we live in and what, is compromising humanity right now is extremely important. So what is it about? What is MILABs? What do people need to know about this, James?
The MILAB syndrome is an outgrowth of this whole reptilian overlordship, which I'm going to talk to you in depth today. MILABs are military abductees. They are people who, first and foremost, are legitimate alien abductees who are consciously aware that they've had a lifetime of alien abduction experiences. Now, the thing that should be emphasized here is all human beings, to one degree or another, are hybrids. We were essentially brought here to this planet. The human race did not originally start on this planet. It came from elsewhere in the cosmos. In Star Wars terms, we are on the outer rim, way out in the boonies, so to speak.
Right.
And our DNA has elements of the DNA of a number of different ET races, some positive, some negative. And over the ages, a lot of these ET races, both positive and negative, work through certain individuals on our planet. Think of it as proxy spiritual warfare, no different from when the Romans pitted certain Gallic tribes against each other, or the British Empire pitted African tribes or Native American tribes in North America against one another in a divide and conquer strategy. What happens is these MILABs are utilized as operational assets by deep black elements of the military, intelligence, aerospace community. It's precisely because they have this alien DNA within their genetic code, which makes them valuable, because the morphic resonance, the ancestral genetic spiritual memory, if you will, is contained within that DNA. The DNA has innate metaphysical abilities, and the deep black military controllers, as well as various ET groups, know how to access and harness those abilities. Mm-hmm. So it's not unusual, for example, for an abductee to manifest metaphysical abilities when they are in the presence of ETs, or in an ET environment like a ship or an ET installation, underground, in an off-world installation, whatever the case may be. They can levitate, they may be able to walk through walls, they can interface with alien technology, read alien script, even speak alien languages. The list is endless. And these people are utilized as operational assets by deep black elements of the military. Unfortunately, some of these deep black military control groups are either working in conjunction with or seem to be under the control of negative aliens, in particular the reptilians. Most of the MILABs that I have known over the years have all had consciously aware of reptilian experiences. And the reptilians are kind of the black sheep of UFO abduction research. Most of the big-name alien abduction researchers dismiss out of hand any suggestion that reptilians are even real. They make disparaging comments about the lizard people, so on and so forth. But the MILABs that I've worked with over the last 20 years and know very well, and people are contacting me all the time, many of them have had reptilian experiences. There's also a ritualistic aspect to this, because not only is there a deep black, high-tech, weird science aspect to this, but a parallel ritualistic, a magical aspect to it. Adepts, seers, warlocks, mystics, sages, whatever the case may be, for ages have known that we have this interconnectedness throughout the whole cosmos, throughout the whole multiverse. But like I said, beings from both ends of the spectrum, positive and negative, use us to advance one or the other agenda, or to counteract things that are going on throughout the multiverse, because these MILABs are utilized not only in underground installations or above ground installations, or on the moon and other off-world settings such as Mars or other places, but they're actually in space ops, used in deep space stations or traveled or brought throughout the cosmos in spaceships. But they're literally sent through stargates and portals. And not only in this time stream, but some of these advanced, deep black military controllers actually send teams and individuals on time travel, alternate timeline operations, alternate reality operations, where they're tasked with obtaining information, obtaining technology, and so on and so forth. So this is a very relevant topical issue that people need to know it's going on. There's many people that are going through these experiences, countless as far as I know, within the demographic of the larger abductee community. So it's something that really needs to be delved into and understood, because people are being forced to take part in it. They are essentially slaves. Mm-hmm. Many of them, for all intents and purposes, they've been made to take part in things that they ordinarily would never want to take part in. And what's really a shame is that the deep black military elements thereof and some of these negative ETs, they seem to be able to access and utilize these metaphysical abilities that MILABs have. But in their normal waking consciousness, these MILABs cannot always utilize these abilities. However, many of these MILABs have innate shamanic, mediumistic, metaphysical abilities, and they're aware of it. They're psychics, they're remote viewers, they're astral travelers, some of them world-class astral travelers, world-class remote viewers, mediums, which is exactly why they're being used by the military in these different ET groups. So it's a mixed bag. Some don't have as many abilities in their conscious waking awareness, but in altered states of being, and also they can be utilized astrally, not just in the physical body, but they can be utilized astrally by these different beings. So it's something that we must really understand, because I believe that one of the ways we can turn this whole thing around, reverse this process, is for these MILABs in particular, and abductees and spiritual, metaphysically oriented people in general, to recognize the situation we're in, develop their metaphysical potential, remain heart-centered, and utilize their abilities to advance, to raise the harmonic, raise the frequency of this planet, to bring about healing to this planet, to the people, to the individuals. And this is the first essential step to reverse this whole process that we find ourselves in, this really negative world, this darkness that's come about.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you to go back a little bit, something that you said in reference to, of course, the technology, going into, these special programs or actually missions and whatnot with using this technology. Was this technology given by these, specifically the reptilians, or do you think it's a combination of other entities, extraterrestrials, that the U.S. military has at this point?
These reptilian beings have been here all along, and I really believe the way they have attained their control is after the most recent series of celestially driven cataclysms about 12,500 years ago, when a lot of the surface, very advanced civilizations were basically no more, right?
Yeah.
After these celestially driven cataclysms and the Earth settled into its new axis and the survivors started coming out of the caves, that's when I believe the reptilians struck, because there was no more advanced civilizations on the surface to have to worry about. Many of them have gone underground or went off-world, and the survivors were smaller in number, and it was easier for the reptilians to begin this process of genetic manipulation. And not only genetic manipulation, but foist, harsh, patriarchal, monotheistic gods upon these different people. In so doing, just eradicating as much as possible the feminine principle, the mother goddess creed and belief systems that existed amongst most of those surviving groups. The esoteric metaphysical knowledge that had survived and which was being passed down through astronomer, priest, and through shamans, seers, what have you. Over time, a lot of those people either had to go underground, were gotten rid of by the reptilians and the hybrid humans that they genetically created. And so what happened, yes, there was basically a takeover because this opportunity presented itself. And what was the question again? I just want to circle around back to.
Well, it was. You're doing great. I'm totally digging what you're saying. It had to do with technology. Who.
Oh yes. Well, there was a parallel stream going on where, as we progressed throughout the ages, there was always this underground. These esoteric brotherhoods. Some people call them the White Brotherhood or Sisterhood. And then you have these dark satanic groups which manipulated the surface world. So there was always groups, service to self and service to other groups of human hybrids of one stripe or another, human alien hybrids of one stripe or another, that were always in contact, telepathically, physically, whatever the case may be, with one type of group or another, positive or negative. Now, where this really jump-started, this whole deep black breakaway civilization really kick-started, was in the 1940s. The Roswell events is a classical example of this. I've always had a different take to Roswell than others. There's been a lot of spin that's gone out in recent times. Oh, Roswell didn't really happen. It was disinformation. And I'm not going to go into all the details. People need to do their own research. I'm satisfied Roswell was real, and that it really happened, that aliens, both living and dead, were recovered, as well as all the technology that went with it. What happened was that really began the modern era deep black connection. There had been crash retrievals prior to that. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 1942. Apparently there was a crash retrieval in England by the 8th Air Force during World War II, and in other places. But Roswell really just kick-started this whole project, this whole process. A lot of it went deep black underground as they began developing back engineering the technology and trying to understand the physics behind the drive systems, the metallurgy, the chemistry, and so on and so forth, and the biology. Well, when it went deep black underground, and they had survivors of the Roswell crash, and lo and behold, they found out that they'd known all along there was an esoteric understanding that there were beings and civilizations that lived underground. It was fairly common knowledge amongst the indigenous peoples of the world, the Native Americans, the Africans, the Celts. Throughout the ages, they knew that there were these other races and beings that lived underground, and the elite and the people in the know on the surface, they knew that. Okay, so then Roswell happens, these deep black back engineering programs begin taking root. A lot of the money is being siphoned into these black aerospace, what became the aerospace programs underground. And they realize, well, there are these civilizations and ETs underground already. They've been here all along, and then we're aware of them. They come and go. So what happened was this ongoing interaction has taken place, really developed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s between non-human life forms, some from off-world and some that were here all along underground, undersea, and the deep black military aerospace community. But keeping in mind that there was this parallel esoteric, occulted, if you will, underground stream of knowledge that had been prevalent all along. And eventually what happened was, because the reptilian human hybrids had already assumed control of these, basically the whole world government, they easily once again took over this whole deep black program of the back engineering of UFO technology and the interaction with these non-human life forms. Because if one studies the history of the aerospace corporations, and in the beginning there was only a handful of aircraft companies in America, in England, and other places, the seed money for virtually all those original aircraft companies came from the Rothschilds, came from the Rockefellers. So those ruling reptilian bloodline families, just like they sunk their talons into medicine and education, into industry, et cetera, they, at a very early stage, took control of the aircraft industry, which later morphed into the aerospace industry. And so this ongoing interaction with non-human life forms in the underground bases, it just gradually started developing more and more over the years. And then beginning around the 80s, although my mentor investigated a case that from 1954, if I remember correctly, in Indiana, when an entire family was held in detention by the U.S. Army after aliens had come and abducted the family in the remote farm. The military came along after the aliens left and basically held the family there in detention, incommunicado. They had teams running analysis and radiation samples and whatnot in the grounds of the farm, and they used mind control, memory erasure techniques on the family. There was 3 generations of family members, if I remember correctly, on that farm. So that was 1954, and the military was already interacting with people who'd abducting them, essentially detaining them, imposing amnesia on them. So that process just snowballed up to the 80s and early 90s when we started having all these reports of people being kidnapped by the military that were abductees and being debriefed and interrogated and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I have a question, if I may.
Oh, sure. Please.
It may be a trite question, but I think that some of our audience may need to understand it a little better, including myself. How do reptilian hybrids even come into being? How does that happen?
Well, what they've done is these reptilian beings, they genetically began manipulating the human gene pool, and they imbued their characteristics and attributes of this warlike mentality, of sadism, of the concept of the reptilian concept of human ownership, as I call it, territoriality, sexual aggressiveness, so on and so forth.
Patriarchy.
And they foisted monotheism a lot of times, this absolute hatred of the feminine principle, because for people in the know, the feminine principle, the right hemisphere of our brain is where our power is. That's where the intuition, the astral abilities, the remote viewing abilities, so on and so forth come from. And what they also did, just to digress for a second, the reptilians also foisted alphabet symbol language, which radically shunted human beings into the left hemisphere. If there's one book that people should read to really understand how this process developed, there's a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, The Conflict Between Word and Image by Leonard Schlein. He doesn't mention the word reptilians in it, of course, but he goes into the whole history of how alphabet languages just radically force people from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere, made us cold and overly logical and hierarchical and all that. So they imbued their DNA, and they created these elite bloodlines with the David Icke hypothesis, which many people are familiar with, as I call it. And these elite reptilian human hybrids became essentially the plantation managers of this planet. They created all these religions, all these rules, all these institutions. They took over the educational system. They took over the medical system. They created the psychiatric pharmacological tyranny, this medical tyranny that makes people sick and kills them off. And then you have what we have today, where the skies are crisscrossed with chemtrails. You can barely see the sun most of the time, and the food is bad, and the GMO and the honeybees are dying. I mean, that's where we're at now. That's where we're trying to stop. And what they've done is, what I'd like to talk about is some of the dynamics of how that process is done. And terraforming it is part of the process, because these reptilians, most of them exist underground or off-world. And these reptilians have phenomenal abilities. They're masters of resonance and frequency. They can alter their density. They don't need spacecraft to travel around in. They can open a portal and come right into your house. And what they've done is they've imbued the characteristics of themselves into this hybrid bloodline. For example, to answer your question, serial murderers and child molesters are garden variety versions of the elite that you will find in Bilderberg and Bohemian Grove and other places. And what they do is, in a parallel astral dreamscape, psychological and physical manipulation, these people have a genetic predisposition because of a preponderance and overabundance of reptilian DNA. There are marked physical and neurological differences between people that have an overabundance of reptilian or Draco DNA. Draco are the winged gargoyle species. They're also reptilian. For example, let me give you the example of Joel Rifkin. Studies were done on Joel Rifkin. He was a serial killer. And it's well known that serial killers have limited or non-existent frontal lobe capacity. The frontal lobe is our impulse safety net. It prevents us from acting on our impulses. It prevents us from acting like going into a rage over little trivial things or just attacking people for no reason. Well, studies have shown that serial murderers have limited or no frontal lobe capacity. And just as biologists and engineers talk about form following function, where the reptilian hybrids are concerned, psychology follows neurology, which follows genetics. And so, on the one hand, these serial murderers, these reptilian human hybrid serial murderers, have are almost completely lacking in frontal lobe capacity, so they have no impulse control. On the other hand, they found through physical dexterity test with Joel Rifkin, a serial murderer, that they have little or no control of their extremities, their hands, their feet, and whatnot. Now, this is a deadly combination because you can draw a parallel and a contrast with people, mediumistic people, seers, shamans, what have you, who get downloads, and you're probably familiar with this process, downloads, insight into people's past lives or their own, downloads of information where they seem to plug into the information field. Well, what happens with serial murderers is they're reptilian familiars, familiar as in family, because these bloodlines are manipulated and genetically enhanced with this reptilian DNA through centuries. They will go to the trouble of arranging unions and marriages and relationships, even one-night stands between two people, just to get the right proper mix of this reptilian DNA. Well, the downloads that the reptilian familiars give to these reptilian human hybrids who have a genetic and spiritual predisposition to being taken up as a host, literally, where these interdimensional at times, because they have the ability to alter the frequency, can literally not only attach to the auric fields of these people, but eventually take them over. The downloads they give these hybrids is sadistic imagery, repetitive sadistic imagery of just rape, murder. And when you study the research done on serial murderers, you will see that many of them talk about how they get these images, these sadistic images come into their mind and they can't stop it. They just come in, and oftentimes it's the same images over and over, and they're compelled to act out and try to replicate in their mind what they are seeing. Try to manifest in the physical world what's going on in their mind all the time. And sometimes it's accompanied by loud, high-pitched tones in their head or their ear, so on and so forth. And these can be quite sadistic images. And a lot of times voices will tell these hybrid serial murderers in the making what to do. It's very common, in fact, to read the testimony of serial murderers and those who have been incarcerated and who talk about their lives, that they're aware that they have these entities working through them, or they will refer to that, well, there's a monster within me, and when the person started killing, say, a victim, the guy says, well, I stepped out of my body and I just watched myself kill this person.
Yeah.
That's also a very common theme, because the interface is complete. The energies work through the person as a physical medium with which to wreak havoc on the world. And likewise with child molestation, the entities will continually put images of abusing children in their mind where they can't block it out. They're compelled to view child pornography. They have these sick fantasies about children over and over. Even when they get around children out in public, they start to twitch and feel odd and have uncontrollable body motions, right? And when people say that, oh, these serial murderers, they could be anybody, they look just like us, nothing could be further from the truth, because they have marked physical characteristics. Their eyes sunk deep in the eye sockets.
I agree. You can see it.
Yeah, you can see. It's like a deviant. They look deviant.
Yes. I mean, just look at Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, Ted Bundy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the drawings and the sketches of these people that they've made of their familiars, right? Dennis Rader, the so-called Southside rapist of St. Louis, there was a winged demon, could have been a Draco, that was coming to him all the time. Ted Bundy was complaining as a child that scaly creatures were coming out of his closet, right? And a commonality that a lot of these serial killers have is, as children, that not only were they a lot of times bedwetters and manifesting real sociopathic, psychopathic behaviors at an early age, but many of them killed furry animals. They didn't just kill, and it's bad enough, like amphibians, like frogs or toads or whatnot, but they actually got a hold of like squirrels, dogs, cats, and they killed them. You see, so the bloodlust was there to begin with, and sometime, if you'd like, if we could have a whole show where I can go into the dynamics of this, go into all the details of exactly how this process is done.
Absolutely.
to these people. So, and those are just the quote unquote garden variety serial killers, garden variety. And another thing too is the reptilian familiars and the Draco familiars, because these people not only can be taken up as a host by reptilians, for example. People can be taken up by mantis beings as host, or gray beings, whatever the morphic resonance is from the DNA, what types of DNA they have the most of, and what's happened to them throughout life, what kind of trauma they've experienced, what kind of childhood abuse they've experienced. Pharmacology plays into this. Sorcery in its old sense of like drug use, because certain drugs have a sympathetic resonance to negative entities like crystal meth, derivatives like crank, speed in general, amphetamines. They resonate with this these reptilian beings, and one does not even have to have a preponderance of reptilian DNA to be taken up as a host by these beings if they indulge in crystal meth for too long, because that's a fast track for being hosted. Because when you study the reports of these meth users, tweakers as they're called sometimes, a commonality is the mayhem that they and the berserk nature of their life. They just go crazy and they kill and mutilate people. And when you listen to them talk when they're already incarcerated in these state prisons, they'll say, "Oh, I always had voices telling me what to do. I had voices encouraging me to get into child pornography." It goes on and on. It's because these people are used as physical mediums for the entities to work through. And that's the most important thing that people need to understand. We're not just up against power mad bankers and industrialists and financiers. Let me take a sip of water.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing that up. That's exactly what I wanted to bring up to the people, is that this is not simply limited to a small sect of my labs or just a group of dark, military people or just a small group of, Satanists underground. This is far more widespread.
It's widespread. Let me just give you an example. I'll make 2 points. Another point that I was going to get to is that these entities also promote these serial killers or people who are not serial killers but have got that, are resonating at a lower frequency because of, yes, they probably have a preponderance of reptilian DNA without being aware of it, so they delve into certain lifestyles, certain types of music, because it's all about frequency and resonance. And a lot of these people get into black magic, into ritualism. Many serial killers, what law enforcement routinely covers up is many of these serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, the so-called Night Stalker, they were into black magic. They were into ritualism and sacrifice. And not only that, though, but some of these serial killers were also part of cults. They were part of active satanic cults. So it mirrors what the so-called elite do, right? But what people have to realize is this manifests all across the board. It cuts across all racial lines and demographics, all income brackets, because when domestic violence occurs, say that there is someone, a guy, like in our example, who's is physically abusive and psychologically abusive. And when you look at these people, some of these physically and psychologically abusive guys, for example, they may not be serial killers, they may not kill women, okay, but they beat them and they psychologically abuse them just the same. So what happens is these entities work through these physically and psychologically abusive guys, and the entity will actually take them over. I mean, sometimes women describe, like his eyes go crazy, and he just seems to get taken over, and then he just goes nuts and starts harming me. And what's going on is the entity, the familiar of the abuser, is feeding not only off his rage, because the entity is promoting the rage, but it's also feeding off the fear and anxiety of the woman who's being psychologically and or physically abused, because we are resonators. We emit frequencies. Yeah. And these negative entities, it behooves them to keep us in a lower vibratory state. Mm-hmm. Hence, we're hammered by GMO, by pharmaceuticals, with bad music in the 440 hertz frequency, which is discordant to begin with. Plants don't even like the frequency the music is played in.
Yeah, right? Yeah, good point.
So, and then you add on to it the so-called entertainment industry. It all factors in. And alcohol abuse, drug abuse, many people who have these experiences self-medicate. It's understandable if they don't know what's going on, or there's fear involved. So when one uses certain types of illicit drugs or imbibes in too much alcohol, that really opens the door for these entities, because what they do is, when one's auric field, and this is why it's so important to have an understanding of metaphysics and spirituality. People think that, just to digress for a second, that, these Native Americans and these indigenous types, that's so quaint, smudging a room because they think there's bad spirits there. Well, they have a reason they're doing that. Mm-hmm. Because there could be an active portal entry, there could be blocked energy, there could be negative entities that's invisible in the physical, in the visible spectrum. So they have a good reason for doing that, and it's effective too, right? It's all about frequency and changing and moving energy. And so what happens is, when you have all this domestic strife from a physically, psychologically abusive guy, and then the related fear and hurt that the woman is feeling, that all that feeds these entities. They go into a feeding frenzy because we are emitters. We are resonators of frequency and vibration. It behooves them to keep us at a low vibratory state of fear, of anger, of want, of fearing for loss and hunger and inadequacy and lack of abundance. People have been taught to have poverty consciousness, They haven't been taught that they can manifest abundance in their lives, that they can manifest good interpersonal relationships in their lives. Let me give you an example of how this works in a generational sense, how this dysfunctionality and this domestic abuse, it just carries on ad infinitum.
Yeah, please.
If you were to come across, say if you were to go to a meeting of adult children of alcoholics, you will find that most of the women especially have had abusive relationships throughout their lives. And this is because when they grow up in an alcohol-fueled, strife-ridden, disharmonious life, family, that leaves energetic psychic imprint upon them when they see their father beating their mother or a boyfriend beating their mother, so on and so forth. The morphic resonance of that violence-filled atmosphere is absorbed, literally absorbed into that young girl. As she grows up, first of all, she's got the wounded inner child issue, the shame-based, self issue. And then she goes out into society. And this could start happening as early as junior high school or high school. Because of what she's experienced, without her knowing it, subconsciously she's emitting that vibration of the disharmony, the strife, the acrimony, the abuse that she felt and witnessed and probably received, was abused at some point too. And what happens is you have all these hybridized abusive males out there, and they pick up on that vibration. They can also, it could be body language, but the vibration is a big part of it because they have entities and malign influences working through them. Some of these people, these abusers, may not be fully possessed, but they are malignly influenced. And because they're not aware of the problem, and they may have come from a strife-filled family themselves, they just carry this bubble, this pocket of rage and aggression with them. So when they see one of these girls who've come from these alcohol-induced abusive homes, they are drawn to these girls. And because the girls have not been taught to use their right hemisphere and to listen and feel the heart center vibe within them, so they can detect this guy is a whack job, he's a freak, all my senses tell me to get the hell away from him. Well, she can't do that because she's never been taught how. She's been indoctrinated and excreted by the educational system. She's been shoved over the left side of her brain, low self-worth, all that stuff. And the abuser who meets her, he's silver-tongued. He's manipulative. What he does is, and it may not take a long time at all, he gradually begins to impose his will upon her because the girl cannot set proper psychological boundaries. Mm-hmm. No one has taught her. She's growing up in an abusive family. So pretty soon, the gal, because she can't say no, and a wise person told me a long time ago, if you don't know how to say no, you will lead a miserable life. And so she gets involved with this guy, and pretty soon she starts getting abused and psychologically abused and physically abused. And when she gets away from that guy, she meets another abuser. And the reason this keeps happening over and over is she hasn't changed the music. Yeah. The music within her that she's resonating and putting out was what she absorbed from that childhood. So when people say, oh, well, okay, it's at arm's length, these occultists running around the woods of Bohemian Grove, what's that got to do with me? Well, what was your upbringing like? You see what I mean? Yeah. And the way that this society, this reptilian-controlled society is, it's all around us. Yeah. This discordance, this disharmony.
Yeah. James, so you just described perfectly what I call miasms. And that experience that she had when she literally absorbed that energy of that fight and discord from the dysfunctional family went into her body, and that became a miasm, and that is what she's broadcasting, right? And she doesn't even know she's broadcasting this frequency, which is attracting.
Oh yes,
that's it. Yeah, exactly. You explained it so perfectly. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And it happens all the time. And gals with self-worth who've been taught, how to set psychological boundaries, how to trust that still silent voice inside them, their heart center vibe. They don't have these problems, but because of the nature of this planet, because of this reptilian infiltration of the human gene pool. What are the statistics now? 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 women have been either raped as adults or abused as children. Yeah. So 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And those are the ones that they know about, because a lot of women refuse to tell anybody to begin with. They refuse to tell.
They don't report it.
Yes. And so... And then you have the double stigma of women who've been raped by reptilian beings, right? It's bad enough that a woman who's raped by somebody who is, to my mind, that rapist is under reptilian demonic control. There's no two ways about it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because it's an act of aggression, it's an act of domination. It's that whole concept of reptilian human ownership. You are mine to do what I wish. It's the sadistic creed of becoming the master and the dominator of that person. It's got nothing to do with sex per se. It's all about control. And when you look around society now, this whole mindset of control manifests all across the board. Local city councils, local homeowners associations, the cops, they've all just gone crazy, because we live in a plane of dualities, and the dualities are becoming extreme, both positive and negative, as we head towards this cleansing that's going to be taking place. And did you want to add or ask me anything in the meantime? I was just kind of...
Yes, I did. I wanted to be... Everything that you just described is very apparent to me and to Ari and to some other people, but I'm seeing that most of the world does not want to look at it. They don't want to look at it, or they're denying it, or what is it about people that don't see this that is so obvious, what you just talked about?
It's not that they don't see it most of the time. They don't really want to see it. They just don't want to know about it. It's probably almost a conscious decision.
Is that what it is? It's just denial?
Well, they're not aware of the multiple threat environment they're in. For example, this is the analogy I always use. When deer have young, when they have offspring, they hide the baby doe in some kind of place where they can blend in with the foliage and where they're at least somewhat safe from predators, right? The animals, the parents of that doe, are not doing it because they are quote-unquote fear-based and because they're vibrationally challenged or spiritually retarded, which you hear all these comments coming from people in the so-called New Age community.
I know.
And because in the Eastern religions, for some reason, and the people really need to think about this, they preach this concept of nothingness, to empty oneself, which you should never do if you're meditating. You should fixate on something, whether it's an object, it's a thing, it's something you look at, it's or something. You just can't empty yourself, because then you open yourself up. And one must always be conscious of keeping one's shields up. Okay, so from the Eastern standpoint, that's an important point to make. On the Western standpoint, what's happened, and I really encourage people to read this book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, because everywhere where the reptilians had foisted this alphabet symbol language, it shunted the people into the left brain, and what that did was they were automatically moved away from a matriarchal mother goddess kind of belief system, where one is in harmony with nature, where one is in harmony with animals, where one is in harmony with everything around them, and they have an understanding of the interconnectedness of everything. Well, one is shunted over to the left side. Everything is a logical, reductionist kind of mindset. And the problem with that is, with the advent of alphabet symbol language, then you have scribes. Then you have a priesthood who interpret the written word, and then you have laws, and then the written word, these texts can be passed down throughout the ages, and they either become even more corrupted or they become changed. For example, most of the spiritual leaders all over the world were essentially of the feminine principle. It's only after the scribes got a hold of their teachings, usually long after these spiritual teachers had passed away. And this is where the reptilians come in, and the demonic archontic influence comes in. Then these scribes twist everything all around. Invariably, what happens in the written word is these creeds and these beliefs of outright misogyny and woman hating, and the marginalization of the feminine principle, the mother goddess concept, they all just start spewing forth, and then you begin having religious wars where. Like look at the Protestants, for example. The Protestants were killing each other. The Calvinists thought the Protestants, I guess, weren't Protestant enough, and the Protestants were killing other people, and they were killing the Catholics, and vice versa, because by that point, the misogyny, the patriarchy, had radically taken over the church. And you look at the Albigensian Crusade. The annihilation of the Cathars, who were Gnostics. They believed in the feminine principle, and they had a lot of the esoteric knowledge that was passed down throughout the ages. They were just systematically slaughtered. Yeah. And then you see a pattern wherever, like when the printing press finally made it to Europe, long after it was available in China with Gutenberg. No sooner had the printing press wound up in Europe than the religious wars happened. Then the persecution against the witches, so-called, happened. And you have there in extremis this misogyny and this reptilian hatred towards the feminine principle just bubble over. And if you read the text of St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, they're all misogynists. Paul of Tarsus, they all hated women. You wonder if these guys were like born from mothers to have such hatred, because women and the nurturing right brain is nurturing. It's holistic, right? Whereas the left side is the hunter-gatherer. And when you remove the safety net of the nurturing side, what you have is what we have today in society. If female cops, they're giving them steroids. They're completely different now. Because you've taken intuition, because you've taken compassion and empathy out of the equation, all you're left are these people who are dogmatically following these laws, whether these laws are legal or not. It's because they're hierarchical in mindset. It's really just a continuation of all these religious wars, all these persecutions, the Inquisition, so on and so forth. That's why I really encourage people, The Alphabet versus the Goddess by Leonard Shlain. This book will blow people's minds. And that was one of the main planks that the reptilians used to set up this whole control system, is get us out of the right hemisphere of the brain, the compassionate, intuitive side, because it goes back to your question of why don't they know all this is going on, the masses, the sleeping masses. because it's what David Icke talks about. He talks about the war on consciousness. I love it when David Icke talks about consciousness, because that's where it all stems from. It's an understanding of what consciousness is, what it should be, and how it's been muted by the controlling factor. Because when you're with someone or around someone who is very sensitive to their surroundings, they're heart-centered, they can instantly sense danger. They can sense when something's wrong. I'm a student of military history. I'm a military historian, basically. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the famous German army commander who had to commit suicide because he was implicated in the plot against Hitler. He had what the Germans call Fingerspitzengefühl, and what that means is he had this sixth sense for danger. There was many times in North Africa where he'd be with his officers and he'd say, "We have to leave here, we're about to be shelled." They'd get into their vehicles, they'd drive away a certain distance, they'd stop. No sooner do they stop in a new location than their old position was plastered with shell fire.
Wow.
You look at Aglala warrior chiefs like Crazy Horse, a very, very plugged-in individual. He used to sit on hillsides and just look up at the sky and just starve himself so he could have a vision, so he can commune with Wakantanka, the great mystery, the great spirit. And then he would have visions of the Thunderbirds. And same thing with Sitting Bull. When he had he did his sun dance and had his famous vision about defeating what turned out to be Custer's troops. These were males who were very plugged into their feminine side because they knew that's where the power was. And there has to be a balance. There has to be the masculine side, and a lot of successful women have this well developed also, where they can strategize and do all this other stuff. But also in military history and warfare, there's also a very intuitive aspect to that too. And some of the greatest commanders of all time, military commanders, had this intuitive aspect to them. And we've fallen away from that, where the skies are crisscrossed with the chemtrails. People look up and see multiple planes spraying them like they're cockroaches. And they don't even realize that there's anything wrong with that. And the chemtrails billow out, and pretty soon you can't see the sun. And it's like this day after day after day, and they're just looking down at their iPhones, and they're playing around on Facebook. And you see, because their consciousness has been muted.
Yeah.
They've been shoved into the left side, and they don't feel. Like, for example, I know when I'm around someone who's a reptilian host because the muscles in my upper biceps tense up.
Wow.
And if I'm not prepared for it, and also in my forearms, if I'm not prepared for it, that negative energy, I can feel it in my heart center. It's like a sucking kind of parasitic energy right there in my heart center. Also in my solar plexus, I could feel it. And then I start looking around. Oh, first of all, I put my shields up. Okay, there's somebody. There's either a host here, or there's an invisible negative energy because I feel it. But I had to learn that. And the way I learned that was I had a long car ride, about a 6-hour car ride, with the person who was a host for a reptilian entity.
Wow.
And I remember sitting as far away as I possibly could in that small car and just hugging my armrest in the passenger seat. And I was all tensed up, and my arms were pressed up against my sides. And when I realized later that person was a reptilian host, and then the light came on, oh, my body was reacting to the negative energy. That's why I felt like my energy was being drained. That's why I was feeling confused, right? So people have to, and animals do this all the time. There's this saying that goes that animals can sense evil. That's absolutely correct.
Yep.
Cats and dogs can sense when a negative person walks into the room. And when you hear these old quaint sayings, what's gotten into you? She's really starting to get under my skin. See, people have to ask themselves, where did these quaint sayings come from? What do they really mean?
Yeah.
And the indigenous cultures who've been systematically wiped out over the ages, and especially in particular the shamanic medicine men, medicine women, the seers, the mystics. Systematically, they've just been all been wiped out because they don't want those kinds of people around who are plugged in to source, because we are all plugged in, or should be plugged in, to divine source. God, guidance of the divine is how I call it, as friends of mine call it. And we have that direct connection. There's no separation.
Exactly.
That's what we've been taught, and that's where our power lies. And when we remember that, remember who we are, reintegrate, heal. I've got a long way to go. I've got a lot of healing I've got to do.
What do you say, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, just because you're on that train of thought. What do you say about people, especially the spiritual community, that are constantly giving their power away to others to get their information from, for example, spiritual teachers, their gurus, channeled material? What do you feel about that?
That goes back to the whole left brain thing and the reptilian R complex, because you're probably familiar with this, but the oldest part of the brain is the R complex, called R complex because it's reptilian, and that's where territoriality, hierarchy, aggression, especially sexual aggression, all those kinds of concepts come from. And one of those is kind of and ritualism, excuse me. And out of that four, one of them is belief in a hierarchical system. So rather than look within, which is where our connection with the multiverse is, and higher and lower planes if people choose to go in that direction, rather than look within, because of the hierarchical mindset of this reptilian brain, they look for others. And because they haven't, whether it's low self-worth, whether it's the wounded, shame-based child, whatever the case may be, they don't trust themselves, they don't trust their own intuition. They are compelled to look to others. And again, depending on what kind of DNA, the preponderance of their DNA, what kind of familiars are in their family tree. And the reptilians work through a lot of different races. They have a lot of vassal kind of races, like some of the mantis beings and some of the factions of the Greys. They do a lot of the heavy lifting for the reptilians and other beings. Some of the Nordic beings actually work with the reptilians too. And these people may feel that they're getting guidance from spirit guides or from benevolent ETs. And what these beings do every time is they strive to activate the ego of the individual, because ego is a block to learning. Ego is an invisible monster. And when one's ego is activated, their ability to discern, their discernment abilities, their ability to differentiate between positive and negative frequencies and positive and negative energies is severely diminished. Mm-hmm. So they've already got the hierarchical issue, and they've already got the ritualistic issue. So now they're conditioned to look outside. And so what they do is they go to these New Age groups, these spiritualist groups, these spiritualist churches, and often it's not what they hear is metaphysical pablum. It's nothing really deep, nothing you can really sink your teeth into, and it's all towards giving your power away. Mm-hmm. It's not, the teachings are not designed so much to go within. I can understand the value of meditation groups because you're still going in, as long as you utilize protective, practices and learn how to differentiate energies and recognize the shift of energies, what have you. But those people who go to these spiritualist groups and they have a hierarchical status where there's gurus, and the gurus interpret for the people, and what the gurus often do is, no, that wasn't an abduction experience you had. In so many words, what they tell them is you're too spiritually retarded, you're too spiritually unevolved to realize the greater plan, that you made a choice in between lives to come here and serve this greater purpose. Now, the best disinformation always has elements of truth, a kernel of truth within it. Mm-hmm. And I will be the first to say that many of us absolutely have chosen to be here at this point in this time, right? But the way they spin it out in these groups are, well, all these negative experiences you've had, you've drawn that to you.
Right.
You're putting out this negative vibe, and you've attracted this negativity to you. It's a variant, actually a mirror image of a lot of the Christian fundy doctrines, where predestination, original sin, you brought this upon yourself kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is disempowering. And what I've spoken to a lot of people who've escaped, literally escaped from these spiritual groups, and so many of them, often as not, are under hardcore malign influence. Let me give you an example of this couple that I've gotten to know.
Ari, you loving this?
I am just eating it up. What can I tell you?
I know.
And I'm not interrupting you. Notice I'm not saying a word.
Yeah, you know what? That's thank you so much. That's probably why my throat is parched. Let me take another sip of water.
Yeah, take another sip, and we'll get back to the example of the couple you were just going to say. But Ari, I'm just blown away by James. I can't. This is so good. I'm so glad he was saying this.
I'll tell you, one thing I love about you gals is you focus at the epicenter. Because I look on your website, I'm going to listen to all your archive shows. It's just, you focus on the archontic element, which is where it all starts. Mm-hmm. And because everything that manifests in the physical plane first manifests in the spiritual planes.
Right.
A thought is a spiritual thing. People don't realize just how bad stinking thinking is. Having negative thoughts bounce around one's head like an echo chamber. This is why so many people have a poverty consciousness. This is why so many people commit self-sabotage all the time, and just rush headlong from one crisis to another. And these archontic beings feed off that. They want people to rush headlong from one crisis to another because they feed off all the negativity. They feed off the anxiety and the learned helplessness.
Yep.
Right.
But getting back to that couple, they went to the spiritualist group, and this couple had a lot of self-worth. They had done a lot of work on their own, spiritually and metaphysically, a lot of healing work. A very switched on couple. So when they began hearing this guru lady, it was a lady, saying all this stuff, it just did not compute and just did not resonate with them. And that's a key point that people out there have to hear. It didn't resonate with them. It didn't sit well with them. All these quaint expressions and sayings from the past, right? Well, when they began questioning the guru, well, I'm not really sure about that. Can you explain that again? I don't really agree with that. Well, the guru lady began castigating them as, once again, being spiritually unevolved. It's not being able to see the big picture. They're not spiritually evolved to understand yet. And they're too fear-based, right? That's one of the big things.
Little buzzword. The buzzword.
Throwaway lines they throw at us, right? Mm-hmm. You're fear-based. And, well, eventually what happened was this spiritual guru lady had ordered her underlings in that group, it was very hierarchical, to basically start undercutting this couple and trying to manipulate them, and eventually the couple left. And that's when their problems really started, because they then started getting attacked by these reptilians. Oh. What people have to understand is some of these guru types, they themselves are hybrids of one side. We are all hybrids to one degree or another. If we came into this world in the normal fashion, some of us, even in the womb, were being messed with by negative ETs, because the abducting aliens, the negative ones, will literally mess with people when they're still fetuses. Not only that, though, they could have played a role in the people their parents getting together in the first place to continue to create another offshoot or another branch of a particular bloodline. And not only that, though, but to go even further on a tangent, these beings are both positive and negative, follow us lifetime through lifetime. So they know more about us in a karmic, incarnational sense, if that's a word, than a lot of times we do. So this guru started sending her reptilian familiars, and some of these gurus know darn well that they are hybrids of one sort or another. They know that they are consorting with these beings. These beings teach them things, tell them things, train them, instruct them in how to operate. I've spoken to a number of people who escaped from these cults, and I hear the same thing over and over. So these entities were attacking this couple, and their life was turned upside down. And they had to seek help, and they had to find someone who was well versed in detaching people, detaching entities from people, because these entities were starting to form attachments to them, turning their lives upside down and making them so miserable and fearful that it made it easier for these entities to attach onto their auric fields and their ethereal field. Eventually they got help, and they still have challenges, and they still get messed with every once in a while, but it's not as bad as it used to be. But see, there's default settings too. Now, I know that there's good and bad in everything, and as the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Sure.
I would never go to a Reiki healer, because I've heard too many negative stories of people who went to a... That's not to say that all Reiki healers are bad or are even aware of it. Forgive me if one of you happen to be a Reiki healer. But what happens sometimes is these people, maybe they learned from a Reiki healer who themselves was a host for an entity or had demonic attachments or something. And so when they do Reiki or some other modality onto someone, and oftentimes the people that go to them are ill anyway. They have holes in their auric field. They have physical issues, back problems. They have compulsive behaviors, because the negative archontic entities always try to instill compulsive, addictive behaviors. It could be they like to keep us like mired in the lower chakras of existence, right? Turn us into sex addicts, make us all just compulsive and whatnot. So when people
does chocolate ice cream count for that?
Well, the thing about it is, which it's a good question. Dark chocolate, according to some traditions, shamanic traditions, especially in the Andes, it can open up the pineal gland, and I think that's a good thing, right? If we can, like chocolate with real raw unprocessed sugar or some kind of organic sugar substitute, honey, real good organic honey, nothing wrong with that. Everything in moderation, of course, right? So the entities will begin working through these healers. It happened to me one time where this woman who was really basically demon infested and was under mind control. It's a long story, but she kept tricking me, and the way she would do it was she would keep plying me with these strawberry daiquiris. I'd never had strawberry daiquiris, and I loved them, right? And just when I'd gotten really kind of relaxed and a nice buzz going, she would say, now's a perfect time. You're relaxed. Let me do body work on you, right? So I'd lay down on the carpet, and she'd run her hands over my meridians and stuff, and parallel to that, I began having these negative astral dreamscape experiences where, well, I'll go ahead and say it. I was being made to eat like horrible things, right? Mm-hmm. Never. Here's a tip for all your listeners: if you have dreams where people are feeding you bloody things, don't eat it, okay? Because what happens sometimes is we are taken astrally out of our bodies and what amount to astral abductions. And the planes that we're taken to where these negative archontic beings of various stripes operate in, and they use those places as jumping off points to come into our plane. Well, there's physicality in these places. It's just as real physically in those places as it is in our plane. For example, I've had experiences where I was astrally abducted and medically worked on in another plane, which it seemed to start off as an astral abduction. But when I was returned to my body, the same places where I was astrally, if you will, medically poked and prodded, I had physical discomfort in my physical body, right? I didn't see any bruises or puncture wounds or anything, but the pain and discomfort were there just the same, exactly where my astral body was worked on.
Wow.
And so, parallel to this gal doing all this body work on me when she happened to get me, like, basically buzzed out on strawberry daiquiris, I was having these dreams of being made to eat things, and I wasn't lucid in these dreams. And then what happened, I started getting really nauseous. The combination of her body work on me, on my meridians, and these astral dreamscape experiences of eating things I shouldn't have eaten because I wasn't lucid, I was so nauseous that when I would walk into a public restroom that was even slightly malodorous, I would just double over and just start retching. Just the nausea would hit me.
Wow.
I'd run. It didn't matter how bad I had to go. I would run out of that public restroom and just feel really sick. And this went on for some time. So when people told me these stories about going to these healers and then having all these entity attachment problems, I go, that's something like that's happened to me. And so what this couple did was they found a good healer, and he helped to detach some of these entities. But I know a lot of cases where people went to bad healers and bad things happened. So again, it's discernment.
Yeah.
And so people have to watch out. One of the most popular of these gurus is Ramtha, and I've heard a lot of stories about Ramtha.
Thank you for talking about Ramtha. That's wonderful. Go ahead.
Yeah, because J.Z. Knight, she operates out over there in Washington State, and is J.Z. Knight still alive, or did she pass on, or what?
I don't know. I didn't hear anything about that she passed on. I mean, she might have. Don't know.
There's already like websites talking about her and that whole Ramtha thing, right?
Uh-huh.
So like I won't be the first one talking about this.
Good,
right?
good.
Okay, good. Well, let me tell you what happened to my mentor, Barbara Bartley.
What is it about reptilians and blondes? A lot, because even when I was watching the Truman Show, did you notice, Ari, that the reptilian
woman,
fake ones, the fake ones, they were
the blonde hair,
Yeah. I see it all the time.
Yeah, what happens, and this is part and parcel of all this, is there really are beings from the Pleiadians, and they're not only blonde Nordic-looking beings, they're like gray-looking beings. There's different beings, and the Pleiades itself, even esoterically, metaphysical lore going way back, it's a portal, it's a stargate to other planes and other dimensions. So just like our star is in certain places on our planet, there's naturally occurring stargates. Well, what I found over the years is some radically brainwashed, manipulated blonde women who are under malign influence, let's say. They're made to believe this is the actual term some of them have used to describe themselves, Pleiadian hybrid starseeds. Okay? And that's how they describe themselves. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is when some of these Pleiadian hybrid starseeds, quote unquote, have been regressed by a skilled hypnotherapist, what's emerged under regression are like horrendous negative experiences. And then after the regression, for like days and weeks after the regression, the Pleiadian hybrid starseed walk-in is basically a basket case, just a basket case. And what happens is this feedback loop occurs, where after a given point in time, this feedback loop kicks in, and then they're back to thinking everything is positive, there's no such thing as negativity, don't bring up negative stuff about the New World Order to me, right? See, so that happens too.
Yeah.
And some of these quote-unquote Pleiadian women, they're they're really under this malign influence. And see, with J.Z. Knight and Ramtha, transmediumship and what people call channeling nowadays, the problem with transmediumship, which was the old spiritualist term, is one has to deliberately either mute their consciousness or consciously check out and allow another entity or entities, because not sometimes people are taken up as a host by more than one entity. One must intentionally mute their consciousness or check out and allow another entity to come in. And see, that's not good, because if that other entity isn't this Palladian, like, blonde star being, and it turns out to be like a reptilian, Draco, or some other negative entity, well, problems ensue. And these entities are very charismatic. They have they can develop magnetic personalities, be very charismatic. And for those people who lack self-worth, who don't know how to set up proper psychological and spiritual boundaries, they're ripe for the plucking. And what happens, all these people who are seeking answers and looking outside of themselves again, they go to places like Washington, where Ramtha is. Now, I happen to know there is a large underground reptilian base beneath Yelm, Washington. And very negative, horrible things go on there. My mentor, the late, great Barbara Bartley, who to me was an earth angel, and she had done so much for me and countless others. She doesn't get the credit she deserves. She was the true pioneer, not Bud Hopkins, not David Jacobs. I'm sorry, all you David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins devotees and acolytes out there. An abduction researcher is not an abduction researcher if they systematically ignore accounts of reptilians and military abductions. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is.
Yeah, right.
You have to go where the information leads, and you cannot filter out information coming from abductees and then try to convince those abductees, as some people, I won't name who, have tried to do. No, that's not a reptilian you saw. That's a hybrid that looks like a reptilian. Well, I'll go ahead and say that. That's David Jacobs. And there's people like Richard Boylan. I could tell you all kinds of stories about him.
Right? Can I tell you one?
Oh, sure.
Okay, you were about to get into what is going on underneath Yelm, Washington.
Yeah, that part of that Barbara Bartley was involved in. I'll tell you about that in a moment.
Okay, hold that thought. I don't want you to lose your train, but I used to be part of a group, an online group with Richard Boylan's group, and everything was going along nicely. People were talking about their experiences, and I never had any, right? I was there to learn. And so I was watching, listening, and learning, and after about a year, I said, I did have something, that I saw. It was a vision. Maybe it did mean something after all, because I had always dismissed it when I was 14 years old. And what I wrote down what it was, and it was basically that I had sensed and seen with my inner vision, my third eye, that when I had gone, I was 14, and I had gone out to throw away some garbage, and I felt this horrible presence behind me. It was horrible. And in my mind's eye, I saw a two-legged reptilian standing behind me with a knife that was trying to stab me in a certain location in my neck and in my back area. And I was so creeped out, and I just ran back inside, and it was just very horrible. But that was my only experience, and I dismissed it as just having a wild imagination. So I wrote this experience down, and I was thrown out of the group.
Oh, yes. That's par for the course.
I was like, what happened? I said, I spoke about a reptilian. All I did was share my experience. Everybody else is talking about them. But I spoke that we don't allow anybody speaking negative about reptilians was the answer that I got.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's par for the course with Richard Boylan. Let's take a look at him for some time and to feel his energy. But yeah, so I believe it. Did you know that Richard Boylan had his psychology license removed by the state of California?
No, I didn't know.
Well, what happened was See, I knew some of the female abductees he worked with because I lived for a long time in San Jose, California, and San Diego, my old stomping grounds. And I networked with abductees from all over the state of California. And what happened was some of the female abductees he had hypnotically regressed. And, of course, when you have a hypnotherapist regress anyone, that is essentially a master-slave relationship where the hypnotherapist has this control, asserted this control, imposed his or her will on the person being hypnotized. Well, long story short, Richard Boylan was skinny dipping in jacuzzis with a number of the female abductees he had hypnotically regressed.
Oh boy!
Which is
tell me this happened like 40 years ago when he was young and not recently, please.
Well, like the early 90s thereabouts. But
that's still too soon. It
is. Yeah.
It is. God, no.
I've had run-ins with Boylan. Let's just leave it at that. I've had run-ins with a lot of these types actually, because Richard Boylan is the one that says. Is it him or is it Stephen Greer? I get them all mixed up sometimes. No, Boylan was the one that said that there are no negative aliens. There's only military intelligence operatives dressed in lizard suits who are scaring women. That's what he said.
Actually, it's both Richard Boylan and Stephen Greer.
Okay, well that makes sense. Just check out Greer's energy sometime too. A whole nother story there.
So tell us about the what happened with the Barbara Bartley.
Oh yes. Well, what happened was Yelm.
Okay.
As you know, the people who make up JZ Knight's group are not just run-of-the-mill type of people like gypsies or what have you. Where gypsies are great people too, but there's a stereotype that only people that are shiftless, wandering, kind of hippies go to these things, but that's not the case at all. Many of the people who went to JZ Knight's group in particular and basically gave all their worldly possessions to JZ Knight, these were attorneys, these were doctors, these were judges, these were so-called professionals, right? And what Barbara Bartlett did was she, for all intents and purposes, infiltrated JZ Knight's group. Now, Barbara used to work what she called UFO invasion areas, and she always talked about the great 1988 UFO invasion year, where a number of places, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, in particular, that particular year, like entire neighborhoods of people were being abducted, mass abductions. Hundreds of people were being abducted. I had experiences in 88. Well, Yelm, Washington was one of those UFO invasion areas, and Barbie went to work there. And she hypnotically regressed a lot of people in the Yelm area. And many of the people she hypnotically regressed and worked with in and out of regression were in JZ Knight's group. Now, what has emerged is many of these people were having full-on reptilian encounters. Now, oftentimes, the reptilians stay behind the scenes. They let the Greys do a lot of heavy lifting. Once in a while, if a person remembers an experience or has a memory fragment or a memory of an experience comes up in a dream, they'll often, if they do see a reptilian, oftentimes it's a tall being, it's cloaked, or they'll be passed on from one type of ET to another. The Greys pass the abductee on to a slightly different looking kind of ET, and then eventually down the line, they're brought to a reptilian. That happens too. Well, in Yelm, these people were being abducted by reptilians, and they were being taken underground and were brought to a reptilian base. And the things that you've heard about in Dulce Base, where people were being held in captivity, all that was going on underground in Yelm. And I don't want to freak out the people of Yelm, but it's probably not exactly news to them that the weird things are going on there.
Well, you were saying it was a processing thing down there, right?
Yeah, it was. I didn't want to say.
I know, but we've got to go there, don't we?
I know. So if I get bumped off, everybody, okay. So it was because But anyway.
Not by us.
Yeah, definitely
not by us.
No.
I have protection too. I have that spiritual celestial protection, and I've always had. And there is a large processing plant beneath the elm, and there were humans down there that are basically a food source. And this was what was coming out in and out of aggression with the people that Barbie had worked with. And also, when Barbie was in the Jay-Z Knight group, Jay-Z Knight did this exercise where all the members of her group had to wear a blindfold for whatever purpose. And Jay-Z Knight was walking up and down the rows and just pausing and looking at people. Well, Barbie, being Barbie, she tilted her head back and kind of looked beneath the blindfold, and she saw Jay-Z Knight walking up and down the aisles, and she saw Jay-Z Knight's eyes glowing red.
Dear God.
And then Barbie goes, whoa, and she puts her head down and doesn't move, and then eventually Jay-Z Knight walks by her. Okay, so Jay-Z Knight, according to Barbie, and I believe Barbie implicitly, is what they call a shapeshifter. She is one of those, and they do exist. For a long, long time, people have described shapeshifting. Oftentimes, reptilians disguise themselves as other ETs, as Nordic beings, or as like tall grays, for example, but because they have the ability to alter their density, so on and so forth. Anyway, so she sees Jay-Z Knight with her eyes glowing red. Now, I should add also that when people are fully hosted by reptilian entities, for example, especially if they're all souped up on crank or crystal methadone, and the boyfriend who's all cranked out is getting violent or wanting to get violent towards his girlfriend, the women often describe, well, his eyes completely changed. He started glowing, and they would turn yellow, and they turned red, or his face started morphing. Under crank, crystal methadone, that's very common. Again, it's the whole sympathetic resonance thing. So what Barbie described is actually not even unusual in a reptilian context.
Wow.
Long story short, when Barbie was ready to go back home to where she lived, to get on her flight and head back out, she was accosted by two of Jay-Z Knight's thugs. And Barbie said these two guys were right out of Deliverance. I mean, she said that's what came to her mind, is like, these guys are right out of the movie Deliverance. They told her if she didn't fork up all the videotape, because Barbie always videotaped not only the regressions, but the discussions with the abductee before and after regression. And it's the discussions after regression are really interesting because, they've been able to dredge up more memories, things that are a little clearer. Barbie's allowed them to abreact and then scream and whatnot in order to release that blocked energy, that traumatic blocked energy, which is always important in regression. It has to be a therapeutic aspect. One cannot just be wanting to hypnotize people to get information out of them. That's wrong. Anyhow, they told her if she didn't fork up all the videos, and Barbie held her arms a meter wide and said, this is how many videos I had. Because she went there for like weeks, right? Well, long story short, she had to fork up all those videos except one. She managed to stash one, and she gave them all the rest of the videos. They left, and she was able to get on her flight and head back home. And she showed me that one video, and wow, it's just, it's all about a processing plant. The one woman in particular was saying, Barbie asked her, well, what do you think is going down there, on down there? And she said, well, I think the people down there are a food source. And, David Icke has said this. A lot of other people have said this. It's well known within the hardcore UFO abduction researchers that we are not at the top of the food chain. We really got to grow up, people. I mean, not you people, of course, but for those people that are still in denial, still stuck in what I call, the surface level stuff, the New World Order and the banks and all that. They really, because as above, so below, in the dark sense, because the satanic ritual, for example, the cannibalism that goes on, those people are full-on hardcore reptilian human hybrids. And when they get into those feeding frenzies, that's when a lot of the shape-shifting starts. Exactly what Arizona Wilder talked about. So what Arizona Wilder talked about is going on a much larger scale underground.
There was a recent one, James, I'm sorry. There was a recent one on Project Camelot with a woman named Erin, I forget her name. They're calling them super soldiers. I think
I don't really like that name. Just to interject.
I don't either. I prefer sleeper soldiers.
Yeah, I prefer just a MyLab or a project person or something like that, because it almost like glorifies.
She talked about those processing plants. She talks about them in that video. So it is out there.
I'll check it out, because Candy Turner, the late great Dr. Carla Turner, who was the first and foremost of Barbie's proteges, she was like the prototype. She was the one that we all followed. She's the one that inspired me, to do this work. And Barbie and Candy were aware of these processing plants for a long time, and also the Greys are involved in some of the processing plants where they abduct humans in a mind-controlled, and sometimes not in a mind-controlled state. They have them basically, dissect. These body parts will come down a conveyor belt, and they're tasked by the aliens that, with meat cleavers to chop them up and whatnot. Now, these stories have been going on for a long time, and I tell people, well, and Candy said this, we can't say for certain if these are implanted memories that the aliens put into the people for whatever purpose, right? Or if they're a literal reality. Because unless we can, spy, get in and get out and see what's going on, but we can only go by the anecdotal testimony of the abductees who've been down there, forced to take part, and then were released back to the surface. And the stories are consistent. People from all over the place really have described being taken to these processing plants. They're all over the place. So, I'm not picking on Yelm, Washington. It just happened to be a place. Now, for what it's worth, Barbie felt that the JZ Knight operation on the surface was a front for all intents and purposes of what was going on underneath. That JZ Knight, a.k.a. Ramtha, was a shape-shifting reptilian, and she was getting all the worldly possessions and all the money of all these people, fleecing them and squeezing them for all they were worth, and mind-controlling them and doing all these things to them. And at the same time, many of these people were being taken underground and being messed with. So, and again, like I said, those two Deliverance guys confiscated all but one of her videotapes. But that location is just one. I mean, there's Dulcie, there's and in another show I'll talk about, we always hear about the zombie meme nowadays, and there's something to that in a MyLab chimera mad geneticist standpoint. That kind of thing is already going on, because the people down there, the geneticists, see, I don't believe there's such a thing as a purely human mind control project. It's to use mind control as an example, because the consciousness that's coursing through these apparent humans is anything but purely human. It's not a purely human consciousness working through them. If they lack empathy, they've opened themselves up for one reason or another. I guarantee it. They've got things working through them. They may appear to be human on the outside. They may not be a shapeshifter, but it's still not a purely human project. It's archontic forces working through. And then, of course, you have the mind control projects where there are non-human entities running around and deeply involved in certain projects. So in some of these genetics labs, they have been creating chimeras for decades. It's Atlantis all over again.
Jeez.
And what is a chimera, James? What is a chimera?
chimera, depends how people pronounce it. It's basically like a mutated combination of different types of entities, like not only in Dulce, but beneath China Lake, for example, China Lake Naval Weapons Center. They have a dog pound, a humane society on the surface at China Lake, and they use a lot of the animals from the surface right above, the underground base, and they use them in the experiments. So they do things with dogs. They make multi-legged dogs, but it's not just dogs. It's like insects. It's seals. It's birds. It's just, once again, we have the left brain, no empathy. If it feels good, do it. There's no conscious, or there's no qualms, or there's no self-recrimination about doing these things. It's like these.
It's called science.
It's called science. That's what it is, and it's Atlantis all over again. So in another show, when we have more time, I can delve more into it. But there's a zombie aspect to that also. Okay, just suffice to say for now. But getting back to what we were talking about earlier, Barbie always emphasized that in the 1980s, especially 1988, things really accelerated. I say that it's an internal alarm clock where people are kind of programmed, if you will, to go off as in an alarm clock at a certain point. For me, it was late 80s, early 1990s. But in general, people really reported an upsurge of alien abduction activity, UFO activity, military abduction activity in the 1980s, going into the late 80s, 88 especially. That's when the UFO invasion areas really started to become a focal point of Barbie's research. We're talking like a number of states, side by side.
What caused that?
I think they just began accelerating the program, because there's two facets of this, and they're two sides of the same coin. DNA is the currency of the universe, and we not only have, those of us that are abductees and my labs in particular, not only have elements of DNA from one particular ET race, but from a number of ET races. And like I said earlier, there's latent metaphysical power within certain types of ET DNA on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's also the soul aspect, because what some of these ETs refer to, they refer to us as containers, right? Containers of what? Well, probably the soul. And what do the humanists and transhumanists try to tell us? Oh, we're just body bags. We have no intrinsic value, or we don't have no eternal souls. We're like biological androids, basically, because they shunted everyone into the left brain, and that's what they think of them, basically, as automatons. Well, we do have souls, but there's the hybridization aspect also. I mean, the extreme hybridization aspect, where they're literally churning out hybrids in these genetic labs, both underground and in off-world space, sometimes settings, where they create these human hybrid bodies, and then they place reptilian consciousness within them, and they bring all these hybrids en masse to the planet and turn them loose, and they're everywhere basically nowadays. But so there's the soul on the one hand and the related DNA on the other, and these beings, they see us as a resource, not only our bodily fluids and our DNA and our blood and our tissue samples, but our energy, our frequency, our very souls. They are, these negative archontic entities are parasitic in nature. They need us. We don't need them. And they've created these patriarchal monotheistic religions where God has no image other than in some traditions, like an old guy with a beard and a staff. But in other traditions, you're not supposed to have any image of the god or gods, right? It's just like a nameless, kind of faceless, but it's paradoxically everywhere. And again, it's shunted to the left side, because the right side of the brain is very image oriented. It's very picture oriented. So you have all these weird religions where the imagery is not allowed, where pictures aren't allowed, where images aren't allowed. And another group, before I forget, that's also of this kind of guru reptilian influence mindset is, I don't know if you ever heard of J.J. Hurtak. You ever heard of the Keys of Enoch group? Well, that's another one. They go back a long ways, and again, all the best disinformation has elements and kernels of truth, and that's what makes it easier to swallow. What this Keys of Enoch group do, the J.J. Hurtak group do, is they feed people a lot of spiritual pablum, but at the same time, they radically open them up. They open them up to all kinds of malign influences and manipulation. And see, because what these controlling groups do, and this goes back throughout the ages, and this is usually only known to either the guru, him or herself, or some trusted acolytes. And that is that some of these incantations, some of these magical workings, some of these frequencies they use, deliberately open portals, deliberately allow these negative entities to come in and even to attach to people's auric fields and eventually take them up as hosts. Moreover, a lot of these gurus are guided by their familiars to open up their communes and whatnot in places that are naturally occurring vortex areas where ley lines and dragon lines happen to meet. So these locations, these temples and these places of worship, the veils are already thin, and the veils between worlds are already thin in those places anyway. Then they start taking part in all these practices and certain types of rituals and certain kinds of chanting, and their defaults, and they're defaulted to pull in and call in the wrong kinds of entities. Like, for example, when one goes up the Freemasonic ladder, and these temples are always on ley lines and whatnot anyway, and ley lines are not necessarily good or bad, they're just energetic places. And so what they do in the Freemasonic and other fraternal orders is as they go higher and higher, they do more and more of these initiatory practices and rituals, and they get darker and darker in some of these practices. And pretty soon they're a full-on raging host for one or more entities. And even if one isn't taken up as a host, confusion sets in, loss of volition, loss of will. They begin to do whatever the cult wants to do, and any kind of group that is against free will, that is has a rigid dogma and doctrine of following orders and following these rigid beliefs, people need to steer clear of them because they are not something you want to get involved in.
Especially if they're patriarchal in nature. Now,
patriarchal,
which it is.
And it is, and they may seem, some of these may seem like matriarchal, but they're really patriarchal in essence. And that's a very good point. That the J.J. Hurtak group is a classic example. And we're running out of time, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you gals, and I'd love to come back. You're doing a wonderful service.
Oh, absolutely. No, we are like... Yeah, we're very honored and just I'm totally stoked that we've got you to talk on our show, and I would just call this the part one of a series of just very, very important information that we are obviously trying to give to people. We do have a couple of more minutes, and I was just wondering, if you could maybe go into a little bit about these psychedelic, or let's just put it this way, mind-altering type of drugs, regardless of whether they're synthetic or natural. Do you feel that perhaps they compromise the auric field, and then at that point there is some kind of an entity attachment?
It's possible. Like, for example, it's always best, I've never done ayahuasca, but it's always best to do it under the guidance of someone who's a well-regarded, highly thought of shaman or practitioner, rather than do it by oneself. At least the first few times, it's important that one as much as possible, tries to purify themselves, and that's why they encourage people to fast or do other things to prepare oneself. I really haven't done a lot of shamanic work in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
I know in past lives I've had this shamanic aspect in some of my prior incarnations, but I would say that certain psychedelics and drugs can help open one's higher senses, but it's always important that they have this strong ability to put up shields, right? It's similar, for example, to the sweat lodge. I've had people in sweat lodges where they, after being in there for a long time, they look around and they see they're surrounded by grays, for example.
Oh, dear
right?
God.
Yeah, and it's like, well, the person who told me this, she's got that psychic sight kind of thing where she can see in other planes and other dimensions, and she didn't become fearful. She just immediately, put her shields up. Mm-hmm. But some people may not be able to see them in that sense. They can only feel them. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they may not feel them. See, but one must be conscious also always of having their shields up. And there's no way of knowing really if one's shields are not compromised in any way, if there's no holes in them or anything, but it's also the lifestyle one person chooses to have, the kind of thinking that they have, and how often they do energizations and certain types of meditations.
Sure.
And the kind of reading material they do. So I really can't answer the question.
Sure.
I can't encourage people to not do it,
right,
because as Graham Hancock pointed out, this is part of our institutional memory. We've always had this ability to get in touch with other planes and other dimensions. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. The other question I had is, do you feel we're getting really close to a reboot?
Oh yes, I call it a reset.
Okay.
You see, a reboot, reset. It's the same thing that a cleansing, as some of the Native American traditions call it, and this planet is sorely in need of it, because
yes, bring it on, please.
Yes, because everything from the minerals to plant life, it all has consciousness. It's what people who have near-death experiences always say. There is no separation. Everything is connected. But what the educational system teaches, nothing but isolation, nothing but separation, right? But it's not the case at all. And this planet has a consciousness, and it's been abused, and it's been defiled, and it needs a cleansing. It needs a reset. When I think of like the Horizon Gulf platform and then the core exit on top, I think about Fukushima, I think about GMO and the honeybees dying, and it really hurts my soul. It really does. It's over and above what happens to humans. Mm-hmm. It's what's happening to all of the life forms on this planet. But what I take comfort in is, yes, these celestially driven cataclysms, at least usually a double cataclysm, a galactic superwave event from the galactic center, what Dr. Paul Laviolette calls the T-Tauri burst, which can last for several thousand years. And we're in alignment with the galactic center, again, the dark rift, as Maya call it. So not only do we get the galactic superwave that pushes in all the cosmic dust, occludes the sun, and blocks out the heavens, what the ancients always talked about, Ragnarok, what have you, causing the sun to heat up, fire from the sky, causing the ice polar caps to melt, and causing glacial tsunamis. And we know that there are periodic mass extinction events. We know that the Earth has radically shifted, just deep down wellings of the land masses simultaneously in other parts of the planet. Huge upwellings, suddenly huge mountain ranges form seemingly overnight, and mass extinctions of events. Now, at the tail end of the galactic superwave event, I believe a very large comet came through. If you're familiar with Professor James McCandy's plasma comet discharge model, where you don't have to get hit by a comet. When the very large planet-sized comets come in, along with an entourage of smaller objects, right, they can generate a gigantic electrical discharge, which can cause all kinds of problems. If you look at our solar system looks like a battleground. Uranus is tilted on its side. There was a thriving surface civilization on Mars, which, just got wiped out, it seems, in some kind of cataclysm. If you read Dr. Joseph Farrell's book, The Cosmic War, and I happen to believe this, there was once a paleo-ancient interplanetary war that may have resulted in the destruction of an entire, very large planet. So not only do we have periodic cataclysms every 12,500 so years, and we're right on the cusp again, but there's been these interplanetary wars that's occurred. And what's going to happen is, this is why our little corner of the multiverse is where it's all happening, because of the diversity of DNA here, and all the billions of souls here. All these ETs are coming here, both positive and negative, but we have help. We have celestial beings on many planes, and highly evolved spiritual beings in many planes who are working through a lot of people. And so I see good things happening. Now, the good thing about these resets is we may have a partial reset coming up, or it could be a reset, is after the planet settles into its new axis and after the dust settles, someone or something always repopulates the land masses with mammals. Someone or something always repopulates the oceans with marine life. That's just the way it is. It's always happened. There are watchers, and that's going to happen again. And then the survivors the human survivors will come out of the caves, and they will begin a life anew. And it's up to us. See, as long as we put ourselves emotionally, psychically, spiritually in the best possible position, no matter what happens to us, to our physical bodies, as long as we put ourselves in the best possible state of mind and state of being, it really doesn't matter, because, we're going to transition anyway. Now, I think it's incumbent upon us that for those who are left behind, who have to start life existence anew, the cave dwellers who come out of the caves, that we leave them an institutional memory, that we set things up so the survivors are not once again genetically manipulated by the reptilians and once again have patriarchal monotheistic religions foisted upon them, and the whole cycle starts anew. Okay? We have to break that cycle, come what may. And I really believe that if we all collectively raise our vibe and see all the energies coming in from the galactic center, I've made myself receptive to those energies. I'm not afraid of them. If you haven't seen it, I'll send you pictures taken from the Enrico Fermi space satellite of the gigantic gamma ray burst coming from the galactic center. It's 20,000 light years across, and it's ultraviolet sensors, and you can see this large, gigantic purple burst coming from the galactic center, along with the cause of the extremely intense cosmic energy. So I make myself receptive. I don't try to block it out. This is part of the agenda behind the chemtrails. The chemtrails are not only to poison us and depopulation and kill the honeybees, but it's also to block out the sky, because we're not subterranean cave dwellers. Photonic energy it activates our higher senses in our brains, and when they've already created this, I believe, the spiritual net around the planet in the invisible plane, out of the visible spectrum. But they're trying to create this, chemtrail haze. So not only do we not see Nibiru, whatever anyone calls it, but also to block out all these energies coming in.
Absolutely.
Now, they're still coming through, though, and I've made myself receptive to those energies.
Absolutely. Well, we've definitely gotten to the end of the program today. I'm going to be calling this part one of our series together. And I just want to thank you very much, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I'm just very, very happy to have you. And we will see each other, at least the audience will, next Saturday, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You have been listening to Shattering the Matrix with your hosts Ari Kopel and Serena. You have been listening to our wonderful James Bartley, who will be here with us again. See you next week.
You've been listening to Shattering the Matrix with your host, Ari Kopel and Serena. Please visit our website, 2012emergence.com. That's 2012emergence.com. Find us on Twitter at Matrix Shattered, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Shattering the Matrix. Listen to archived shows at blogtalkradio.com/Shattering the Matrix. And join us next time for the birth of the new golden era on Shattering the Matrix.